All right, welcome back. I'll look first to Ms. Taylor Scott. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go ahead and orient us, and then we will pick up where we left off. It is the afternoon of November 4th. We are picking up in the hearing with respect to the proposed Sites Reservoir project. We left off before lunch, hearing from Dr. Rosenfield, and we completed the authorities cross-examination of Dr. Rosenfield. I understand that Mr. Soderlund has a few questions, and we may have a few from Ms. Mandel-Rice. So I believe that is where we will pick up. I see we have Dr. Rosenfield. I see Mr. Soderlund. So please, Mr. Soderlund, if you'd like to go ahead with your questions.
Yeah, after the lunch break and kind of reviewing the cross-examination, I actually don't have any questions. So I apologize. I hope that Ms. Mandel-Rice has questions. If not, I apologize to Dr. Rosenfield for making him wait through a lunch break.
Ms. Mandel-Rice, do you have questions?
I unfortunately do not either. So my apologies for the delay in releasing Dr. Rosenfeld.
No problem, and we should all have never apologize for not having questions. Mr. Hitchings, based on the I'm sorry, I'm doing this wrong. Mr. Busher, based on the cross-examination, do you have any redirect for Dr. Rosenfield?
Yeah, I've just got a couple questions. So Mr. Soderlund and Ms. Rice are off the hook for keeping him around. Dr. Rosenfield, Mr. Hitchings this morning showed you a note to reader when he was talking about the State Board's 2010 Public Trust Report that is Baykeeper Exhibit 96. Prior to today, were you familiar with that note to reader?
Yes, I've seen that before.
And can you just explain your understanding of what that note is and how you used the Public Trust Report Baykeeper 96 in preparing your testimony?
Yeah, that note is a caveat that nothing in the report should be taken as a water rights objective or indicative of what the water board is going to do when it updates the water quality control plan, and the need to balance other uses, etc. But the report represents a technical assessment of the status of Bay Delta fisheries and the effect of flow and operation, reservoir and diversion operations on the public trust fisheries. And that's how I use the report as a scientific basis and support for my professional opinion. That was an excellent review of the scientific basis for the status of Bay Delta fish and fisheries and the effect of flow on those fish and fisheries as the water board understood it and as we all understood it in the year 2010.
Second, Mr. Hitchings asked you a question about a statement you had made in paragraph 60 of your testimony related to Old and Middle River flows or OMR flows. And there was a absent citation or a lack of a citation that he had asked about. Were you able to find a citation from the EIR or otherwise for that statement in paragraph 60?
Yes, I looked it up over lunch. It's from the final EIR for Sites Reservoir. I believe the exhibit number is AHO number 124. And I was looking at table 5B as in boy, 3-6-4C as in cat. And that's at page 116 of the PDF. Old and Middle River flows and the difference between the no action alternative and alternative 3 as broken down by water year types and months. Thank you.
And then you were asked a few questions about harvest rates and Chinook salmon harvest rates. Are you aware of any peer-reviewed analysis addressing or comparing the effect of out-migration survival with marine survival or marine mortality in terms of the impact that has on the number of adult salmon that return to the watershed to spawn?
Objection. That's outside the scope of the cross.
Will you run the question by me again, Mr. Busher?
Sure. Are you aware of any peer-reviewed analysis comparing the effect of outmigration survival with marine survival or marine mortality with respect to the impact on how many adult salmon, Chinook salmon, return to spawn in the watershed? And I'm happy to respond to Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, please.
So Mr. Hitchings asked questions about the incidental harvest of Chinook salmon. I think the numbers he gave were that 1 year recently it was 26%, and that was above the 20% limit. It's pretty clear from those questions and then the questions of other witnesses that the intent or the line of questioning is designed to get at whether it is marine mortality as opposed to something else that is reducing the viability of the fish population or the fishery. I want to know if Dr. Rosenfield is aware of any peer-reviewed science that addresses that question. Seems directly responsive to the question he was asked by Mr. Hitchings.
I'll allow the question. Go ahead, Dr. Rosenfield.
Yeah, I cite in my testimony a paper by Cyril Michel from 2018. I believe that's Baykeeper exhibit number 58. And that studies the relative effect of outmigration and the factors that affect it, and marine survival on the ratio between outmigrating smolts, juvenile salmon migrating out to the ocean, and the subsequent return of adults. He calls it the smolt to adult return ratio. And the conclusion of that study is that outmigration and outmigration survival, meaning juvenile survival through the freshwater environment and the conditions that affect it, which he identifies to be most strongly freshwater flow, river flow during outmigration, are by far the most important factor affecting the smolt to adult return ratio. Increased flows mean you get more adults returning per smolt going out in his analysis, and that the effect of marine survival is episodic and infrequent, related to environmental conditions in the ocean, but that it's rare that we see ocean conditions and ocean survival having a large effect on the ratio of smolts going out to the ocean and their frequent return to freshwater.
All the questions I have.
Thank you. And then with that, Mr. Hitchings, do you have any additional cross-examination questions for Dr.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Then with that, Dr. Rosenfield, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time and effort to be here, and you are excused from the witness stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We don't have a lot else to address today. One is just laying out our plan going forward, and two, I did briefly want to revisit this issue about the rebuttal schedule and the ITP. A question that I have is, I understand that there is modeling related to the ITP that the protestants have requested and that the authority is working, as I understand, diligently to get turned around, and that this is all happening over essentially in the last day, since Friday. My question for the protesting parties is, based on what you know, how much time do you think it's appropriate to prepare rebuttal testimony once you have the modeling that the authority relied upon? What is your request? And I'll look to Mr. Busher only because you're on camera, but I know Mr. Mooney and Mr. Schutz had also chimed in on some of these issues as well. Do you have anything specific related to that?
Let me do my best, and I apologize for the lawyerly answer. I think it depends because, and I think it largely depends on whether the testimony related to the ITP is going to be staggered or not. If we are presenting, if the deadlines are going to line up for the ITP testimony and we're presenting our analysis at the same time Sites is presenting theirs, I think we're going to need more time to dig into those models and understand those impacts than if, we have a more finite or certain target to address in terms of the impacts of the ITP on Site's presentation so far. I think it is going to be really hard to have all of the necessary work done if we are addressing everything in the ITP, not just merely Site's characterizations of it, or things that, specific issues, than the 5 weeks or so that we have, assuming that all of the underlying modeling information is available, in the next few days. So I apologize, that's not a hyper-specific answer, but I think it's going to be really difficult to be able to put all of that together by December 13th, especially in the position we're in now, where we don't know what Sites proponents, what their claim about water availability is, for example, or what their claim about how the new conditions do or do not impact the cost of the water or the cost benefits of the project. Building that from scratch is going to take a lot longer than being able to respond to what their analysis is. And so I'm skeptical that we'll have it, that 5 weeks is sufficient. I don't know if others have anything they want to add to that. I'm also very, very much not the person who is going to be in the model and the spreadsheet doing the work. So I'm a little bit hesitant to make promises about that as well.
Understood, and that's fair. Mr. Hitchings, please.
Yeah, thank you. With regard to the modeling tool that was requested, I expect we'll be able to circulate that this afternoon. So that will be out. The rebuttal deadline is December 13th, so it's still more than 5 weeks away from here. From Site's perspective, we feel strongly that this is exactly how SIR rebuttal can be used to the extent that once we see the rebuttal that comes in, there's 5 weeks to work with this information from this point forward. The SIR rebuttal is exactly the procedure that is appropriate in this case to address additional issues that might be raised by the Site's rebuttal testimony that are touch on the issuance of the ITP and that how that interrelates with water availability, impacts to fish and wildlife, cost of the water, whatever the issue might be. So, and I want to note, this is exactly the discussion that we had back in April, and the hearing officer, you decided to, hold off on putting rebuttal dates on, subject to the ITP being issued by October. That's exactly what happened. We talked about SIR rebuttal back then as a potential option, and so I feel like we are rehashing this a bit when we had that discussion earlier, and we did a whole new schedule after the April pre-hearing conference on this in relation to that. So we do think that SIR rebuttal is the best way to address all the parties' concerns and relative interests here.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Mr. Reese.
Yes, thank you. I would echo or share Mr. Busher's comments, but when we set the schedule or the hearing officer's decision or order was to go forward, it seemed to me that we were going to go forward, and we held off initially on setting rebuttal dates until we had the ITP. Now we went ahead and set rebuttal dates, and they're on us pretty quickly here, and we just now have the ITP. So that was my recollection. I may be wrong, but also with regard to how much time we need, I don't know, because I'm not a modeler, and I haven't been able to, until our modelers, our technical people receive the data, receive the information, they'll tell me whether or not they need more, it's accurate, they've had any difficulty working with it, et cetera. It would seem to me like we could eliminate some of those concerns if we're going to go forward with scheduling rebuttal or keeping rebuttal schedules, if we did it in a staggered manner, and be a lot more efficient than trying to also clean everything up on SIR rebuttal when we're sort of shooting blank on rebuttal because we don't know what sites really make specifically of the ITP in terms of meeting its burden. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm thinking too. I'm pausing and thinking. Mr. Busher, did you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just want to respond briefly to Mr. Hitchings. I mean, he is correct that this spring we, as a group, discussed whether we should move forward with case in chief before the ITP or not. That ship has sailed, but we also objected to moving forward without the ITP for this very reason, that we've now heard 2 months worth of testimony that, at least some portions of which are not about the project that's going to be operated. And so, the fact that we moved forward last time over our objection is not a reason to now reject our argument on the same issue.
Thank you. I will circle back, Mr. Hitchings, but Mr. Mooney, please go ahead.
Yeah, I believe what I was going to say has just been covered. I think the game, it's changed, and it's also changed, as I said earlier this morning. I mean, it's project's going to look differently with the ITP than what's been presented, and I think there was somewhat of an assumption before that it was going to just kind of fit in with what the project was, what was being proposed, and it looks like there's some significant impacts or modifications that are going to have to be associated with the project as a result of the ITP.
Ms. Meserve.
Good afternoon, and I apologize I wasn't able to be here this morning, but I did check in with Mr. Ruiz. But yeah, I think my concern is if we're preparing rebuttal for the testimony that we saw come from Site's case in chief, and some of that case in chief testimony was based on a different understanding of operations than is now in the ITP, and with the Delta issues, largely being around water quality impacts and water level impacts for the South Delta as well, I'm concerned that we might be responding to outdated information, and I don't want to waste our consultants' time on that. So that's why I think this issue of phasing is, maybe one way to go, because I don't know, maybe sites will say, oh, our testimony is basically the same as before, or maybe the modeling testimony on some parameters that we're concerned about would be different, but we don't know sitting here today, what those changes in, whether it's the bypass flows or operational periods or, those inputs, whether they match up with the ITP. And I think that's what we're struggling with a little bit right now. Thanks.
Thank you. A clarifying question, and I'll circle back to you, Mr. Schutz. I see your hand. For Mr. Hitchings or Mr. Ferguson, to the extent is it the authority's intent to alter in any way its water right application based on the ITP?
No.
That was well coordinated.
Sorry. No, any water application is for an up to amount. We're not intending to alter that. This project is going to go through phases, and this ITP expires in 15 years. And if the water right is granted, we might be operating for a few years, but any of these large infrastructure projects are going to have permits issued over time. Those permits are going to expire and they're going to be renewed. But it doesn't change the application itself. If permits are placed on the operations that constrain operations, then that will be how the project will need to operate under. But we're not intending to change our application. It could be that a subsequent permit or a subsequent biological opinion from the federal agencies will, 20 years down the line, remove some of the limits that are currently, intended to be proposed under the permits issued now. So, that's why we think that rebuttal is the most efficient way to address this. If there's a need that's shown after the parties submit their rebuttal, parties will have an opportunity to do that. And that's really what we had, I think, all contemplated when we had this initial discussion on scheduling.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. And to, I think you were clear, but just to make sure that to articulate it explicitly as I think about these issues, for example, with respect to water availability, the request from the authority would be for the State Water Board to consider whether water is available for the full face value of the water right application, not whether water is available. I should say the full face value of the water right application, not necessarily including any constraints in the ITP. Does that make sense?
Right. Although I think, you know, I'm expecting that our rebuttal testimony will provide additional information on water availability with these permit limits in place. And the other parties have all of the water availability information that was submitted with our application quite a long time ago. And the other parties have always had an opportunity to take that information and conduct their own water availability analysis. This can be done by us and it can be done by anybody else who's a part of this proceeding to essentially impose the limits under the ITP. And how does that then affect the water availability analysis going forward?
Thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Schutz, to you.
Yeah, I have several things, I think. First, I think that if we actually saw the model, well, the tool, let's call it, the DRAT is the acronym, and I don't remember what it all stands for. But that might give us a better idea of how much time it might take to actually use it. And if there's a lot of questions about what things mean and that sort of thing, it might be different than if it was more straightforward. So speaking from the technical side, I think that's an important determinant. And not getting to the staggering issues, but just simply absorbing things. I will say that much of the rebuttal testimony I personally had contemplated had to do with what was already presented, and now it's sort of everything has to be looked at from the filter of the new requirements. And so a lot of the work that some of us had done and that we were advised we could be doing while the cases in chief were being completed, at least at minimum has to be revisited. And that takes some time and some thought about the sort of bigger picture as well as the details. And finally, I'd like a clarification regarding whether how any testimony that might come forward at this time regarding the ITP would be required to fit within the rules of rebuttal, or whether we're at this point presenting cases in chief basically on the ITP as such without having to frame it as somehow being in response to what the authority or others have put on. My understanding had been that as far as the ITP was concerned, once that was made available, that we could present testimony on it that was not constrained by the rules of rebuttal. And I think it would be useful to clarify whether or not it's the hearing office's view that that's still the case, or whether that's changed. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. And we will get to that point shortly. Turn first back to Mr. Busher.
Yeah, just note a couple things on the water availability. Number one, right, it's the authority's burden of proof to demonstrate that there is water available. And my understanding, I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, is that all of the water availability tools that they looked at included the conditions that were proposed by the authority in their ITP application. And that includes their proxy for 55% Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan update. It includes the tool that the state board staff put together, right? All those conditions were baked in. So if we're responding to say water was not available under those conditions, and the authority's response is those conditions don't exist anymore, I don't know why we're wasting our time doing that. And it seems like, right, we don't need to respond to those prior analyses. We need to understand whether the authority can meet its burden under the current conditions as proposed by CDFW. And I think the other thing I would flag here is the testimony from, I think, most of the parties about the model or the spreadsheet tools that sites had provided and as part of their case in chief. And this is exhibits, I think it's sites exhibits 45 through 49, but it may be the AHO 45 through 49. I don't remember. But those spreadsheet tools, there was a lot more information about what those tools were designed to do and should or should not be used for at the end of site's presentation of evidence than there was at the time where we submitted all of our testimony about those tools. And I think we would have all benefited from that clarity in advance to allow, right, our responses to be more targeted, and to avoid some of that confusion as to like what exhibit 45 versus exhibit 49 should be used for or how they were constructed. And I'm just afraid we're going to rerun that whole process with the ITP if we all try and move forward on December 13th. And I share Mr. Schutz's question and concern about, I mean, it seems to me like testimony about the ITP is case in chief testimony that we had contemplated doing in a second phase. And, you know, I heard Mr. Hitchings say this morning it was very important that we follow the rules of rebuttal evidence. And if that's the case, I'm not sure what that ITP rebuts. And I think it is case in chief testimony that they need to put forward, the site's authority needs to put forward. And right, if the protesting parties want to provide case in chief testimony on the ITP, fine. But if they want to wait till rebuttal, that's fine too. But we need to hear from the authority first on all that stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. Mr. Hitchings.
Yeah, my comment about the following the rules on rebuttal testimony, that was in regard to the testimony of Chairman Mitchum. I've said several times now today that Sir rebuttal is the way to address this. And that essentially in substance is the same. It's rebuttal with Sir rebuttal. It could be case in chief with rebuttal. We can label it what we want. I do agree that it's important to be clear as to what rules will apply to ITP based evidence and testimony that is put forward. But my comment about the rebuttal issue and strictly following that was the fact that we don't have a firm date for some case in chief testimony, and we're about to close the door on this phase of the hearing as it's been noticed so far. But I think Sir rebuttal, structuring it in a way and being clear on the rules as to what the rebuttal evidence with regard to the ITP, you know, that may not necessarily need to be completely tethered to evidence presented in the case in chief. And then the Sir rebuttal provides an opportunity for additional, you know, essentially responsive evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I think to add some clarity to this, and having not, this is not a ruling in any kind on how the schedule will go, but assuming we go forward, if we were to go forward with rebuttal as scheduled, my understanding is that evidence and testimony that comes in related to the ITP would essentially be case in chief testimony, if you will, in the sense that it does not need to directly respond to any other party's case in chief. That this is new information. We knew it was new information that would be coming into the record, and this is the first chance for any of the parties to address it. And then Sir rebuttal with respect to the ITP would function like rebuttal, if you will. It makes it sound complex, but I don't think it's particularly, I think that part would work out fine. With respect to some of the concerns about understanding the modeling tool, I wonder in this case if it makes sense to, I think it probably would, to have what I would call a meeting of the experts, where the witnesses for the protesting parties and the witness for the authority who will be explaining this modeling tool or the use of it or who can explain it would meet outside of separate from the hearing team and would talk to each other and explain some of these things and maybe we could get that moved up front. I know that's not normal practice in California. When I practiced in Colorado, it was a new practice. I think it's been in place for more than a dozen years now, where there are required meetings of the experts in water cases, where the experts talk to each other and work out some understanding. So I am thinking about whether that makes sense here. We could just call it a direction to meet and confer, if you will, between the technical experts. And I might leave that to you, but that is something I'm thinking about. We can address it again on Thursday, since we're coming back on Thursday. But that may, I mean, to the authority, I think that could help. Offering to make that available could help us with our timing. And then in turn for the protestants, it could help cut through some of this, as you pointed out, the challenges with understanding these modeling tools, which I'm fortunate enough not to have to work directly with, so I don't completely understand. Mr. Hitchings, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you. Just to be clear, this is CDFW's modeling tool. It's
Right.
not Sites. I mean, Sites is
Thank you.
obviously familiar and has seen the output, but it's CDFW's. And I'm thinking it might be most efficient. Again, I'm expecting that we're going to be able to send the information before the end of the day. Folks will have a chance to at least do an initial look at it, and we're reconvening on Thursday. I think that gives us an opportunity to formulate any questions that might come up. I would also encourage that if there's anything, analyses that the other parties have seen in the ITP so far, that they feel that the background technical information for that is important and it's not obvious from or otherwise, referenced and linked in the ITP, to maybe have that list ready by Thursday as well, to the extent there is anything else. But I think when everybody gets a chance to see the spreadsheet tool and then the modeling explanation that goes along with it, that'll help refine maybe some of this uncertainty that we're all trying to grapple with.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings, and thank you for the clarification that it is CDFW's tool. Mr. Busher.
Two thoughts, and I appreciate Mr. Hitchings' willingness to share that information, both this tool and otherwise. I mean, I identified this one because it was apparent, related to the upstream flows, and easily called out. If there are other tools that either Sites or CDFW put together that you all are aware of, I mean, we just request that all of that underlying data be provided, or underlying analysis be provided, right? Not specific to us digging through 600 pages or 500 pages of ITP documentation by Thursday to try to flag every reference to some exterior piece of information. So, I mean, I think it's a broader request than just the one tool. If there are other specific things I or others encounter, I'm happy to share that. But I mean, I think it's all of that. And the other thing, I'll just reiterate one of the things I said this morning, which is I hear from the hearing officer and from Mr. Hitchings, right, that the testimony about the ITP is new. It is not responding to, right, Dr. Rosenfield's testimony. It is not responding to Dr. Herbold's testimony or the testimony of other Delta witnesses, right? It is wholly new. And if that's the case, it's case in chief testimony. And let's do it, and let's do one rebuttal phase at the end, rather than doing rebuttal for everything but the ITP now while we're trying to analyze the ITP in the next 5 weeks, and then also rebuttal for the ITP later, right? That just doubles up the work that has to be done on the protesting party side to go through 2 rebuttals. And just in terms of timing, I think a meeting of the experts would likely be beneficial to everybody. I'm a little skeptical that we're going to be able to get that right scheduled, right, reviewed, scheduled, and then the work done after that by December 13th. Right? That's just a lot of busy people's competing calendars. And, an election this week and a holiday in 3 weeks and then Christmas holiday right after that. So I think we need to be pretty targeted and precise about what it is that we do first. And from my perspective, right, the best way to approach this is sites needs to demonstrate that they can still meet their burden of proof, and then the protesting parties have a right to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. So let me understand, Mr. Busher, if the proposal, I just want to make sure I understand your proposal, which is that sites would put on not its entire rebuttal case, but just the ITP related additional information, and then we would move entirely rebuttal back altogether. Is that what you were envisioning?
So I'm not envisioning is a strong word. I think that is a better option than the status quo. I'm going to defer to, I don't want to speak for anybody else. I just putting together the testimony, the rebuttal testimony, the surrebuttal testimony, right? That's a lot of work for the NGO party specifically. And the more efficiently we can do that, and the fewer times we have to go through that process, the better able we are to participate and to provide helpful information for the state board to ultimately make a decision here. And the more we're burdened, the harder it is to do that, the more risk of prejudice there is. I mean, if this is case in chief testimony and not rebuttal testimony, by the way the rules are written and designed, then let's wait and do the rebuttal after all the case in chief testimony is done. I think staggering the ITP testimony makes sense. In terms of the case in chief, if it's not going to be staggered and we're all going to address the ITP, I think that's going to be confusing and longer than it needs to be. And I don't think we're going to necessarily be ready for everybody to do that on December 13th. But I don't want to speak for either NGOs or for the counties here.
And that's fair. I want to attribute your statements to, and we're all working on the fly here, but I'm sort of intrigued, and I was just trying to make sure I understand the concept, which, as I understand, would be one idea would be, let's finish case in chief on the ITP. Could be both the authority and protestants on the ITP, and then we'd have rebuttal. It would be case in chief phase 2 or whatever we want to call it, and then there would be a later rebuttal on the entirety of the case in chief. Is that an accurate summary?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I think hearing from sites first about that ITP makes sense rather than trying to get everybody to analyze the whole thing from the ground up, right? Let's see what they say about how that impacts their water availability, and then, go from there.
Does anyone else want to comment on any of these? What I think we'll do is we'll revisit this on the 7th. What I propose is we take tomorrow afternoon, the remainder of today and tomorrow afternoon off calendar. We meet at 9 a.m. on the 7th. We hear from Mr. Ratto, and then we come back to these remaining procedural issues as needed. But I expect it would be a fairly short day on the 7th. Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, thank you. I would say we don't support having the staggered schedule on this. If it's case in chief, it's case in chief. That's just going to, further delay the overall schedule. If we have to submit ITP related case in chief information, everyone else then gets a whole lot of additional time on top of the 5 weeks we have now to then review that, submit theirs, and then have rebuttal after that. That's really not how the rules were set up so far on this. And I would say that parties would still have the opportunity, or should still have the opportunity, to make a showing that there's a need for rebuttal if the circumstances warrant that, once we have the evidence and testimony in front of us. So I just wanted to make sure. It sounds like we'll still have further discussions on this because we're doing this on the fly when we talk on Thursday, but we think that we're prejudiced then if we're put in a position where now there's a staggered schedule. We don't have simultaneous submittals for case in chief like we did when this process and proceeding was set up. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that prior to us revisiting this on Thursday.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Mr. Reese.
Well, I don't want to reiterate everything I've said before, but I would share, and I think we both articulated the same position. I would share Mr. Bush's proposal. And when we're speaking of, Mr. Hitchens speaks about now you think sites would be prejudiced. One way to avoid prejudice is just to call this what it is. It's case in chief testimony and deal with it as it is. A lot of us think that a staggered approach, even if we weren't dealing with a subsequent case in chief type situation, that a staggered approach is more efficient. But we didn't start that way. It doesn't mean we can't switch to that now. But at minimum, if we're not going to do that, if we're going to be avoiding prejudice, then we call it what it is. It's case in chief testimony. And I've said that many times, but I feel strongly that's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Hitchens, did you have a follow-up, or is that it's a remaining hand?
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. And thank you for all of your input on this. It's a challenging proceeding to organize. With that, is there anything else we should address before we break until meeting again on November 7th at 9 a.m.? Ms. Mandel-Rice.
Just a follow-up request to Mr. Ruiz for the modeling runs from DSM-2 from Mr. Burke, please.
Yes, I am following up with him myself on that. So he'll get those as soon as I get them forthwith.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then with that, you have the remainder of your day. Thank you once again for the efficiency today. I appreciate it. We are officially taking tomorrow afternoon off calendar. We will reconvene on November 7th at 9 a.m. And I will see all of you then. Thank you very much. We're adjourned for the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.